Welcome to Boxing Pedigree TV, where we speak nothing but truth, facts, and professional boxing talk all day, every day. I'm your host, Vance, and let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about who would win. And the features here is Terence Bud Crawford against Errol the Truth Spence Jr. These are two solid welterweights. Probably the top two in the welterweight division. I have Terence Crawford number 1 and Errol Spence number 2. Really good records. Both of them are undefeated. Terence Crawford is 27-0. Errol Spence is 26-0. Their knockout ratios are great too. They're both higher than 70%. You have Errol Spence at an 80% KO ratio, and you have Crawford at a 75% KO ratio. The last few fights, Crawford has been knocking out everyone he's fought, and Errol Spence has been going the distance. What's unique about these guys is Terence Crawford is 5'9" in height, and Errol Spence is 5'10". So Errol Spence is an inch taller than Crawford. However, Errol Spence's reach is 72 inches, and Crawford is 74. So in actuality, Crawford has the reach advantage against Errol Spence. So who would win between these two gentlemen? I spent the weekend watching their fights. I'll start off with Errol. I'll tell you things I think he does really well and the things I've seen that could use some improvement, especially before he fights Terence Crawford. So what I did is I watched Errol Spence fight against two solid fighters, Sean Porter and Kell Brook. And I watched another one of his fights against a guy named Emmanuel Lartey. I'll start off with Kell Brook, what I've noticed. With Kell Brook, I saw really good defense. I saw how Errol was able to have really good head movement and how he was able to out-wrestle Kell Brook, another really big welterweight. What I didn't like in that fight is when he did get hit by Kell Brook, his response wasn't that good. You can always tell when a punch hurts a fighter. There are two things. First, you'll see it in the legs. The legs never lie. That's probably the most obvious. The legs will stiffen up and it'll drag. And then you'll also see the hands drop from a solid hit. So you see a person hands drop after they get hit, it's basically just a shock going through the body. So I've seen that a couple times against Kell Brook. But Kell Brook's a heavy fighter. He was coming down from 154. He just fought Triple G. So he was coming down. He drained himself for the fight, but he was coming out as a bigger man. And Errol Spence dealt with it, and he stopped him, actually. It was a good fight. I also watched Errol Spence fight against Sean Porter. And Sean Porter's not known for a heavy puncher. Sean Porter is one of those fighters that he wears you down. He's very, very mauling. He's very, very rugged, and he just wears his opponents down. What I noticed in that fight is Errol Spence was able to fight the same type of fight. He showed he was a dog. They battled in the pocket, blow for blow. Errol Spence took his best shots, and Sean Porter took Errol Spence's best shots. What I did see in that fight that was negative is that Errol Spence tend to have a wide stance, meaning that his feet are far apart. And you got to take consideration that Errol Spence is a southpaw fighter. So when you're fighting an orthodox fighter like Porter that's going to maul you and your feet are very wide, that's not a good look, especially if they have good feet work. And I think Porter has above average feet work. So what I noticed in that fight is he was able to spin Spence a lot. And when you spin a fighter, 9 times out of 10, you can shoot your right over that fighter's guard because they're in the transition of spinning around to face you. So unless they keep that high guard up at all time while you're spinning, which instinctively most fighters don't do, you have the opportunity to catch them. And you've seen Porter do that a couple times to Spence, and a couple times he rocked him. But anyway, it was a great fight, one of the best fights I've seen, and Errol Spence weathered the storm. So what I learned from Errol Spence in that fight is he has a lot of dog in him, but his stamina is really good too. To fight a fight like that on such a high level, all 12 rounds, was pretty impressive. I was impressed by Spence. Then I watched Spence fight against um, Emmanuel Larte. And this is one of his earlier fights. And this fight right here was the first fight I've really seen that Errol Spence's chin is it's not questionable because I think he's a solid fighter, but it's tender. He can get hit and he can go if you can get to his chin. And that's saying a lot because one thing that Spence is very underrated in is his jab. He has a really, really good jab. And I think that's actually the key to his knockouts. His jab is so good that it sets up that left. And a lot of his fighters, after they get stung by that jab, they don't even see that left coming. And it's night-night. You always get knocked out by the punch you don't see. So my assessment after those 3 fights, watching Spence, is he has a solid chance in beating Crawford if he can keep that jab out there. He has a great counter pull too. So if he can implement that counter pull when he fights Crawford, and if he can work on his stance, I think the wide stance is going to be totally detrimental for him because of Crawford's athleticism, his IQ, and if he thinks that Porter was giving him a hard time spinning, a great switch hitter like Crawford will be a nightmare. So he needs to work on that stance. I mean, he has a good trainer. Derek James is a great trainer. So hopefully, if I see that, I'm sure they see that, and they'll work on that. They'll work on that. Excuse me. Now let's move to Crawford. I watched Crawford fight against Amir Khan, against Jeff Horn, and I watched this fight against Gamboa. And I'll start off with Gamboa. Gamboa, when he fought Crawford, was easily a top 10 fighter in the world. Maybe push it. Maybe a top 15 fighter in the world. Gamboa had the combination of speed, power, and confidence. And I watched Terence Crawford totally dismantle Gamboa. In the process, I seen his chin get tested, though. And what I saw in that fight when Crawford's chin got tested, is that Crawford you're gonna have to kill him to beat him. Because he was hurt, but he still kept coming forward. And in the midst of him being hurt, he knocked Gamboa down. And he was still cognitive to set up a combination while he was hurt. He's a very, very dangerous fighter in the ring. And another thing I noticed in that fight with Gamboa is that Crawford is really, really good at setting you up with feints. And that's something I noticed about Spence. Spence is gullible for feints. I saw Porter do a really good job of feinting Spence and then countering him off that feint. This is something that Crawford does perfect. He'll set you up with feints and then he'll catch you. And what's even worse about Crawford is he'll set you up in a southpaw stance with a feint and then switch to a right and catch you. And he does it seamlessly and flawlessly. He's really good at that. A lot of his knockouts have come from that. Just the way he's able to engineer setup shots. I watched this fight against Amir Khan, and this really told me a lot about Crawford. Probably I learned the most from this fight than I have all the other fights, and it wasn't a long fight. It only went 5 rounds. But Amir Khan has such a high pedigree that it showed me where Crawford was. And it's hard to say this, but Crawford's pedigree even surpasses Amir Khan. And I say that because I watched how the whole first round Crawford, he felt Amir Khan's speed, he felt out his distance, and he was baiting Amir Khan sometimes. Amir Khan has a really good 1-2. Oh man, it is so sweet. And what I like about Amir Khan is he never places all his weight on his lead foot. So he can easily, charge in, or he can easily step to the side. But he has really fast hands. And I watched Crawford, measure his speed, and he was very, very accurate and deliberate in measuring. You can just see he was doing that. And then when he came out in the second round, it's like he collected the data and he was pretty much just processing what he collected in his attack. I mean, he would throw uppercuts with the left, follow it up with a right shoot, and pretty much was just outwilling Amir Khan with the combinations and the sense he had in there. And I think as soon as Amir Khan felt the first knockdown, which was amazing, because what Crawford did was he baited Amir Khan into his 1-2, and then he pivoted and caught Amir Khan with a check left hook and then followed with a right while he was in the southpaw stand. So you have to see it. The way I'm explaining it to you sounds impossible, but when you see it, you realize how creative Crawford was to do that. And I think once Amir Khan felt that, he knew, like, hey, I'm in way over my head. Not only does this kid have power, but he's setting me up with moves that I really can't defend. I think that's probably Crawford's main attribute, is his ability to set you up. Then I also watched the Jeff Horn fight. And what I learned from that fight is Crawford is really strong. I mean, he's mean, he's skilled, but he's strong. Like Jeff Horn, he bullied Pacquiao all 12 rounds, threw him all over the ring. Couldn't do that against Crawford. Matter of fact, Crawford was bullying Jeff Horn. It was like he went in there with the mindset that I'm a bully you. And he did it the whole fight. And you could tell it took Jeff Horn by surprise, and a lot of commentators as well by surprise. And he ended up stopping Jeff Horn. So I think a lot of these welterweights that aren't fighting Crawford now are really doing themselves injustice, because not only is Crawford getting better at his craft, but he's getting more comfortable at this weight. Crawford's coming up from 140, but you can see his body's filling in. His KOs they're getting quicker. You see these welterweights responding really bad to his hits. So when you combine just his IQ, his meanness, his athleticism, and now, he's filling in to be a true welterweight, these kids won't have a chance against him. Now, how would he do against Spence? I think he does really well against Spence. I think Spence has good defense. I think Spence is very knowledgeable in the fight game, especially in welterweight. I don't think Spence has ever fought anybody like Crawford, who can just switch and catch you with power shots. Like I said, I've seen both of their chins test numerous times. And I think Spence reacts a little more questionable when his chin is tested, whereas I think Crawford transforms into a dragon and he comes back at you. That could work for him and against Spence, because like I said, Spence has 80% KO ratio. But I don't know if he can be done against Crawford. My opinion in this fight, I would lean more towards Crawford winning the fight, even though I am a Spence fan and I'm a Crawford's fan. But just looking at just the facts and the attributes of these two highly gifted boxers, I would have to lean towards Crawford winning this fight, especially if this fight takes another year or two to happen, because like I said, Crawford is just filling in. So that's all I got for today on who would win between Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit that subscribe button below. Be safe, and one love.